I saved the company from the brink of bankruptcy, turning it around with nothing but grit and determination. The board cheered, the CEO smiled, and the employees called me a hero. But just hours later, the very people I saved would strip away everything I'd built. They fired me, no warning, no thanks. Just a cold, heartless decision, as if my years of sacrifice meant nothing. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just going to walk away quietly. I had kept every secret, every financial transaction, every hidden lie, documented and ready to expose. The real game was just about to begin. My name is Adam Hale, and I've spent the last 18 years of my life working for Aderis Enterprises. I'm 42 now, and over nearly 2 decades, I've built this company from the inside out, transforming it from a small, struggling business into one of the industry's leading firms. I started as a financial analyst, working long hours in the basement, handling spreadsheets that no one else wanted to touch. In the years that followed, I climbed the ranks, navigating office politics, overhauling outdated systems, and earning a reputation as the man who could fix anything. Aderis was built on the back of ambitious goals and a team of driven individuals. But when things took a turn for the worse, I was the one who managed to steer us back on course. I was the one who, over the course of the last year, had pulled the company out of a financial freefall. We were facing bankruptcy, teetering on the edge of insolvency, with our debts piling up faster than we could pay them down. Clients were leaving, investors were demanding results, the future of Aderis looked bleak. But I saw potential. I saw a way out. I spent sleepless nights, crunching numbers, looking at patterns that no one else seemed to notice. I cut costs where I could, streamlined operations, and renegotiated contracts with suppliers. I found new revenue streams we hadn't even considered. Slowly but surely, the company began to breathe again. I presented my findings to the board and, with their reluctant approval, implemented a series of aggressive measures that would ultimately save the company from the brink of collapse. We were on our way up. Things were finally looking like they were going to turn around. The numbers spoke for themselves. Revenues were climbing. Our stock price was up 35% in the last quarter alone. I had made sure every move was backed by data, every decision meticulously planned. And then, just as things were getting back on track, it happened. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I received the call. It wasn't the kind of call you expect when you've been a loyal employee for nearly 2 decades, when you've single-handedly brought the company back from the edge of disaster. But there it was, the voice on the other end of the line. "Adam, we need to talk," came the voice of Jason Miller, the CEO of Aderis. "Come to my office. Now." I knew the tone in his voice. It was cold, distant. The kind of tone that told me this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. It was the kind of tone I'd heard before, just before someone got fired, before everything came crashing down. But I had done everything right. I had turned the company around. I couldn't fathom why this was happening. I grabbed my jacket and walked down the hallway to Jason's office. The air in the building seemed heavier somehow as I passed by the desks of my colleagues. They looked up at me as I walked by, some offering forced smiles, others glancing away quickly. There was an odd sense of unease in the office. Jason's office was, as usual, immaculate. It smelled faintly of the cologne he'd always worn, expensive but not overbearing. He was seated at his desk, looking over some reports, his back to me as I entered. "Close the door," he said without turning around. I did, and when I sat down across from him, I could feel the weight of the moment. He looked up from his desk, finally meeting my eyes, his expression unreadable. "Adam, we've decided to go in a different direction," he said, his voice flat, as if he were discussing an insignificant change in company policy rather than delivering the news that would change my life. I felt a rush of heat flush my face, but I kept my composure. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Effective immediately, we're eliminating your position," he said, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "You're being let go. We'll walk you through the process in the coming days. For now, clean out your desk by the end of the day." The world seemed to stop. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. The room felt small, suffocating. My thoughts were a blur, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I had saved this company. I had worked countless hours, sacrificed weekends, given up time with my family. And now, after everything, this was how they were repaying me. I nodded slowly, a quiet acceptance settling over me. There was no point in arguing, no point in asking for an explanation. The decision had already been made. I stood up from the chair, my hands shaking slightly, though I tried to mask it. Jason didn't say anything else. He just turned back to his desk, as if the conversation was over. No thanks for saving the company. No recognition for the effort. Just the finality of his words hanging in the air. I walked out of his office, my mind still reeling. As I passed by the empty desks of my team, the younger employees who had worked under me, I could see their expressions. Some were shocked, others looked away quickly. I knew what they were thinking. This was a decision that didn't make sense. Not when the company was finally back on track. I took the elevator down to my floor, my head still spinning. When the doors opened, I headed straight to my desk. I sat down, my fingers hovering over my keyboard for a moment. But then I began to pack. The small cactus on my desk that had survived through years of corporate turmoil, the family photo that had sat proudly beside my computer, my coffee mug with the logo from a charity event I'd attended years ago, it all went into the box. I wasn't angry. I wasn't going to make a scene. But something inside me was already beginning to shift. I had just been fired, but I wasn't done yet. I spent the rest of the day packing my things and trying to ignore the curious glances from the younger staff members. They knew who I was, what I had done, but they had no real understanding of the weight of the position I'd held. Most of them were fresh out of school, eager to climb the corporate ladder, eager to be noticed. They were smart, no doubt, but they hadn't seen what I had seen, what I had lived through. They didn't understand the long hours, the risk, the sacrifice it took to keep the wheels of the company turning when no one else could. Bethany from marketing stopped by my desk just before I left. Her face was flushed with frustration, concern in her eyes. "Adam, this is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising slightly as she glanced around the office. "You saved this place. After everything you did to get us out of the hole, they just fire you." I shrugged. Companies change direction. It happens. She shook her head, obviously not satisfied with my response. "But no warning? No acknowledgement of what you did?" I couldn't answer her. There was no point. She wasn't privy to the behind-the-scenes machinations that had led to this moment. She hadn't seen what I had seen, the gradual erosion of the leadership's integrity, the way they hid their incompetence behind smoke and mirrors. "Don't make a scene," I said, standing up and walking toward the door. "It's fine, really." I stepped into the hallway and left the office without another word, my mind spinning as the elevator doors closed behind me. As the elevator descended, I could feel the eyes of the security guard on me. When I passed by him, he didn't say a word, but I saw it in his eyes. There was pity there, but no one else was going to speak up. I was on my own now. I drove home in a daze. My wife, Claire, greeted me at the door with a kiss. Her smile faltering when she saw the look on my face. She knew something was wrong before I even said a word. "They fired me," I said simply. Her face fell, and she led me to the couch, where we sat in silence for a few moments, the reality of it sinking in. For 18 years, I'd given everything to this company. But now I was gone, just like that. "It doesn't make sense," Claire said, her voice low with concern. "You saved the company, Adam. You were the one who pulled them out of this mess." "I know," I said quietly, running a hand through my hair. "But I think they're hiding something bigger. I don't know what it is yet, but I'll find out." That night, after dinner, I locked myself in my home office and fired up my laptop. The last year had been a whirlwind of financial reports, debt restructuring, and negotiations, and I had all of the company's financial records at my fingertips. I had spent years meticulously documenting every transaction, every decision made. It was part of my job, but it was also my safety net. I had to keep track of everything in case something went wrong. And something had definitely gone wrong. I began to dig through the records from the past year. It didn't take long before I noticed something strange. There were several payments to a vendor I didn't recognize. Falcon Enterprises. They were a relatively new supplier, and on the surface, they seemed like a legitimate business. But the more I looked, the more I found. Their invoices didn't add up. The amounts were inflated. There were payments for services that didn't seem to exist. Some payments had been approved by Martin Reed, the CFO, who was, by all accounts, a hard-nosed businessman. He had always prided himself on keeping a tight leash on expenses. I made a mental note of the inconsistencies, but it wasn't enough to go on yet. I needed more. A couple of hours later, as the clock ticked past midnight, I found something else, something bigger. A few months ago, when I had been restructuring our debt, I had stumbled upon a set of unusual agreements. On the surface, they appeared to be routine operational agreements, but there were inconsistencies in the signatures and approval timelines. More importantly, the agreements had been filed under a separate department that I'd never seen before, the Legal Compliance Department. I couldn't remember ever hearing of that department. The more I looked, the more I found. The head of the department, Nancy Collins, had filed a series of non-disclosure agreements that at first glance seemed perfectly ordinary. But buried in the fine print were clauses that authorized untraceable transactions to Falcon Enterprises. And the payments were significant, over $1 million. The pieces started to fall into place. This wasn't just about me being fired. This was about a larger scheme, a cover-up. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. For the first time since I was let go, a feeling of cold clarity settled over me. I wasn't just going to walk away. I wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. Tomorrow, I would make my first move. The next day, I didn't waste time. I knew exactly what I had to do. I spent the morning gathering everything I had found so far. The payments to Falcon Enterprises, the discrepancies in the legal documents, the strange approval chains that had bypassed normal procedures. I compiled everything into a detailed report. I even cross-referenced the approval dates with company emails, pulling out messages that showed who was involved in the decision-making process. I wasn't just going to send this to the board without something more. I had to make sure this couldn't be ignored. By early afternoon, I had my plan in place. I created a secure, encrypted email account that would be untraceable back to me. I made sure to use a VPN and a burner phone to communicate, ensuring that no one could trace my actions back to my home or personal accounts. Then I sent the email. It wasn't just a report, it was a bombshell. The email I sent to the board was a calculated risk. I had carefully crafted every word, making sure it sounded like a concerned whistleblower rather than a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. I didn't want to come off as bitter or vengeful. I wanted the board to take this seriously without dismissing it as a personal vendetta. I outlined the key discrepancies I had found in the financial records, highlighted the connections to Falcon Enterprises, and provided clear evidence of the inflated payments that had been approved without proper oversight. I even included copies of emails that showed how senior management had knowingly bypassed standard procedures to get these payments approved. But the real kicker was a single line in the email, a subtle hint about Martin Reed's involvement in the scheme. I didn't name names outright, but I made it clear that I had enough information to unravel the entire operation if needed. I hit send just after 2 p.m. and sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. My heart raced. This could go one of two ways. Either they would recognize the gravity of the situation and act swiftly, or they would try to cover it up and discredit me. For the rest of the day, I kept my phone on silent, refusing to look at the missed calls or emails piling up. I needed space to think, to process what I had just set in motion. It wasn't until the evening that I received a response. It was a voicemail from David McDonald, the chair of the board. His voice was clipped, urgent. "Adam, I need to speak with you. We've reviewed your report, and I think we need to meet in person. This is bigger than we thought." The relief I felt was fleeting. It wasn't over yet. The board would need time to process what I had sent them, but I was no longer in control of the situation. They were now in the driver's seat. The real question was how much they knew, how deep the corruption ran, and whether they had the stomach to confront it head-on. The next day, I received another call, this time from Nancy Collins, the head of the Legal Compliance Department. Her tone was calm, too calm, as if she already knew I was the one who had sent the email. "Adam," she said, "we need to talk. I understand you've raised some concerns about the company's financial dealings. I think it would be in both our best interests if we could sit down and discuss this face to face." I could tell from her voice that she wasn't surprised. In fact, she was likely prepared for this moment. But I wasn't about to play their game. I wasn't going to meet with her without knowing exactly what was at stake. "I'm not meeting with you unless the board is present," I said. "If you want to discuss this, we do it on neutral ground, with full transparency." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a soft laugh. "You're making a mistake, Adam," she said, her voice almost too sweet. "But fine. We'll play it your way." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. Nancy Collins had been in charge of overseeing the legal side of things, and if she was involved in this scheme, it meant the corruption went deeper than I'd originally anticipated. But now I had her attention. And that was exactly what I wanted. The following morning, I got a text from David McDonald. "We're meeting at 10 a.m. I'll be in touch with the others. Be prepared." My heart pounded as I read the message. This was it, the moment I had been preparing for. In just a few hours, I would be sitting across from the very people who had turned a blind eye to the financial corruption that had nearly destroyed the company. Now I would have the power to bring them to their knees. I arrived at the board meeting location, an upscale private conference room in a downtown hotel, early, a full 20 minutes before anyone else. I wanted to make sure I was calm and collected, but inside, my pulse was racing. This meeting was the culmination of everything I had worked for, and I couldn't afford to let nerves get the best of me. The room was sleek, minimalist, with a long glass table that reflected the dim lighting above. I could feel the weight of the moment in the air. A large projector screen loomed at the far end of the room, but for now the only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. At precisely 10 a.m., the door opened, and the board members filed in, one by one. David McDonald, the board chair, led the way, followed by Nancy Collins, Martin Reed, and a few other faces I recognized but hadn't worked closely with. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone took their seats, their eyes flicking toward me. I was no longer the former employee who had just been let go. In this room, I was the one with the power. David took his seat at the head of the table and gestured for me to begin. "Adam," he said, "we've reviewed your report and we're concerned. But we need to understand the full scope of what you've uncovered. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with here." I cleared my throat, projecting my voice with calm precision. "This is more than just a few irregular transactions. Over the last few years, certain individuals within this company have been siphoning money through inflated vendor payments, and they've been covering their tracks with fake contracts and false paperwork. I've tracked these payments all the way back to Falcon Enterprises, a company that appears to have been created solely for this purpose." The room was silent as I continued, laying out the details of the fraudulent scheme, showing them the evidence I had gathered, the emails, the payment records, the hidden approvals that had bypassed proper channels. "You're looking at a situation where millions of dollars have been funneled into a fake enterprise, all while this company's leaders pretended everything was fine. The people behind this are sitting right here in this room." I turned my gaze to Nancy and Martin, watching as their faces paled. Their discomfort was visible, but neither of them spoke. "I don't expect you to take my word for it," I continued. "That's why I've included everything you'll need to verify this information for yourselves. The forensic accountants can trace this back easily." The air felt thick with tension. I was pushing them to face the truth, but I knew there was a risk. If they chose to cover this up, it could all backfire. But I was ready. Ready to go to the authorities if I had to. Ready to take it public if that's what it took to bring justice. David leaned forward, his expression grim. "What do you want, Adam?" I paused for a moment, allowing the question to hang in the air. This was the turning point, the moment that would decide everything. "I want accountability," I said, my voice steady, "and I want the corrupt individuals who have been taking advantage of this company held responsible. If you're serious about fixing this, you'll do what's right." David glanced around the room at the other board members, each one looking a little more uncomfortable than the last. The tension was almost unbearable, and then, just when it seemed like someone would speak up to deny it all, Nancy finally broke the silence. "Everything you've said is true," she said quietly, her eyes not meeting mine. "I'm involved. I didn't know the full extent of what Martin was doing, but I can't deny it." The room went quiet as Nancy admitted her involvement. For a moment, I thought I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. The weight of her confession was both a relief and a shock. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Martin Reed, the CFO, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face had gone pale, his eyes darting from me to the others at the table. But he didn't speak. Instead, his eyes locked with David McDonald, the board chair, who had remained stoic throughout the entire meeting. David leaned forward, his voice calm but edged with something I hadn't heard before. Concern. "Are you telling me that the company's CFO and head of legal compliance were both involved in siphoning millions of dollars?" His voice didn't rise in anger, but it was clear he wasn't happy. Nancy nodded slowly, her gaze now fixed on the table. "Yes, but I didn't know about Falcon Enterprises until it was too late. I was just doing my job, following orders. It wasn't until Adam started raising questions that I realized the scope of the fraud. I watched as David processed the information, his hands resting on the table in front of him. He was trying to maintain control, but the shock was written all over his face. The people who had steered the company toward ruin were the very ones who should have been its guardians. I knew that no matter how this played out, it would never be the same. The board remained silent, their eyes shifting uneasily as they processed Nancy's admission. Finally, David spoke again, his tone much softer now. "We'll investigate this immediately," he said, but it was clear that the wheels had already begun turning. "This is a serious matter. We'll be notifying the authorities, starting with the SEC. We'll conduct a full audit and ensure that anyone involved is held accountable." I nodded. "Good. But the damage has already been done. Your company is lucky that I'm the one who found this. You'll need to act fast, or there could be even more consequences." I left the room shortly after, my head still spinning from everything that had transpired. As I walked out of the building, the city around me seemed strangely calm. I had expected to feel triumphant, but instead, all I felt was exhaustion. The battle wasn't over, but I had done what I set out to do. I had exposed the fraud, and now the company would face the consequences of its actions. The next few weeks were a blur. The board took immediate action. Martin Reed was fired that day, and Nancy Collins was placed on leave pending investigation. The forensic accountants dove deep into the company's financial records, uncovering even more irregularities than I had initially discovered. By the end of the month, Falcon Enterprises had been fully investigated, and it turned out the entire operation had been a front for laundering money. David MacDonald publicly apologized to the shareholders and promised full transparency moving forward. Meanwhile, I took a step back and watched from the sidelines. I wasn't looking for revenge or recognition. What mattered to me was that the company I had spent nearly 2 decades building was finally going to be held accountable for its actions. But something else was changing. I had been the quiet, behind-the-scenes player for so long. Now, I was being asked to step into a new role. 2 weeks after the board meeting, I received a call from David MacDonald. "Adam, the board has unanimously decided to offer you a new position," he said. "We want to create a Chief Financial Integrity Officer role, reporting directly to the board. You've proven yourself more than capable, and we'd like you to take on this responsibility. Full oversight, full authority." I paused. This wasn't what I had expected. It wasn't what I had been looking for, but it felt right. The offer came with a substantial raise, a more prominent position, and the opportunity to steer the company into a new era. I didn't say anything for a moment, just letting the weight of the offer sink in. Then I spoke. "I'll think about it," I said, keeping my voice steady. But deep down, I knew that this was where I belonged now. I wasn't just the man who saved the company from bankruptcy anymore. I was the one who would rebuild it from the ground up. The next day, I met with Claire and told her everything. She was proud of me, but she also knew what this meant. It wasn't just about fixing the company anymore, it was about creating something new, something better. I accepted the position a few days later. 6 months passed, and the company began to turn around. Slowly, it regained its footing, and under my watch, we implemented stricter financial protocols, regular audits, and an unwavering commitment to transparency. The board had learned a hard lesson, but in the end, they had put the right person in place to ensure it never happened again. As for Martin Reed and Nancy Collins, they were both facing legal action. Reed had already been charged with embezzlement, and Collins had been implicated in money laundering. I had played my part, and now justice was being served. But it wasn't just about the company anymore, it was about knowing I had done the right thing. I had saved the company not just from bankruptcy, but from itself. I had rebuilt trust where it had been shattered, and in doing so, I had rebuilt myself. The door to my new office was closed as I sat back in my chair, looking out at the city below. My phone buzzed and I glanced down. It was a message from David MacDonald. "The board has approved your proposal for an expanded audit." They're all on board now. I smiled faintly. It wasn't about taking credit anymore. It was about ensuring the company had learned its lesson and that no one would ever forget what had happened. As I walked out of my office later that afternoon, I saw the young staff in the hallway, quietly talking among themselves. They looked up as I passed, and this time there was no awkwardness, no forced smiles. There was respect. They had seen what I had done, and they knew I hadn't just saved the company. I had made it stronger than it ever was before. As I walked out of the building that evening, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I wasn't the same person who had walked in all those years ago, but in a way I was finally where I was supposed to be. And for the first time in a long time, I could walk away from the office with my head held high.